both sides of the Pacific suggest trust between China and the U.S. has plunged. So what are the reasons? And with so many citizens expressing disfavor of each other, will this complicate the world's most important bilateral relationship? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Now, on Tuesday, China's top legislature approved an extension to the term of the current Hong Kong SAR legislature. The move follows Hong Kong SAR Chief Executive Carrie Lam's proposal to delay elections by a year due to the pandemic. Meantime, as tit-for-tat sanctions continue, the U.S. announced it will now require imports from Hong Kong to be labeled as made in China. So how should we interpret the Chinese central government's latest move? And what is Hong Kong's role in escalating China-U.S. tensions? Joining me now for discussion via Skype from Beijing is Mr. Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Soochow University from Hong Kong, Lawrence Ma, Barrister and Chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundations. Great to have you both with us. So let me start with Mr. Gao first. Why has this action been necessary? What do you make the message of the National People's Congress is sending?
Well, first of all, no country or no territory in the world could ever afford to leave their national security interest unattended. And in Hong Kong, ever since July the 1st, 1997, the Basic Law, which is the cardinal law for Hong Kong, has mandated that the Hong Kong legislature need to enact a law on national security legislation. But for very obvious reasons, we know this legislative attempt has never been successful. This leaves the central government with no other option but to enact this national security law for Hong Kong. This is the only right thing to do. Now, I think going forward, what we can be assured of is that stability will be restored to Hong Kong, normalcy will be restored to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong will once again have a very robust rule of law, and this will be the foundation for the one country, two system to operate in Hong Kong for the coming 2 decades or so. I think no one in the world should ever indulge in the fantasy that they can misuse Hong Kong as a place to abuse the national security interest of China or challenge China's absolute sovereignty over Hong Kong. This is the bottom line.
And Lawrence, talk to us about the legal basis of this move. I want to lean on your legal expertise here. This decision was made after 12 Hong Kong opposition lawmakers and activists were disqualified from standing in elections. And Hong Kong SAR Chief Executive Carrie Lam proposed a year-long delay to the upcoming elections. Now, mainland authorities said that this decision proves a solid legal base for the 6th Legislative Council to continue performing duties. But as the delay appears to contravene Hong Kong's basic law, what is this legal basis central government is referring to?
Well, legally, under Article 69 of the Basic Law, the term of the Legislative Council is 4 years, that's for sure. However, the Basic Law is like other constitutions of other countries, which was drafted to operate in quote-unquote peacetime. Now, Hong Kong is now suffering from a regional health emergency. And the Constitution of Hong Kong, which is the Basic Law, has to be interpreted in that context, which means that the state national emergency is in place, and therefore Article 69 has to be given a remedial interpretation, which means that it cannot be literally interpreted as like in quote-unquote peacetime. So as a result, the question to ask is, what is the intention of the Basic Law draftsman intended to operate when intended Article 69 to operate in this sort of emergency situation? And the answer is, of course, it is to make sure that the voters would be able to come out to vote without risking their lives. So to adopt a remedial interpretation of the Constitution or the Basic Law, it would be very likely that the intention of the drafter would have to extend the term of the Legislative Council to a time which allows an election that can be proceeded without any public health hazard.
And now, Victor, the New York Times says the decision appeared to show little restraint because the 4 opposition lawmakers in the Legislative Council are also likely to retain their seats for the rest of an extended term, despite being barred from seeking re-election. Would you agree with that kind of assessment?
No, I think at present, what Hong Kong is very much faced with is to choose between the lesser evils. Look, even President Donald Trump floated the idea of postponing the U.S. presidential election, which, of course, was fiercely opposed by almost everyone in the United States. But if you look around the world, there have been quite a few countries, many cities, for example, which have decided to postpone their election. And this is mainly because you need to give top priority to save and protect the lives of the people. And Hong Kong, given its very small size and also high density and very much internationally connected, to have a pandemic like COVID-19 will really be a major disaster if it is not brought under very firm control. Therefore, I think everyone with a decency of mind will be sympathetic with the government of Hong Kong, which decided to postpone the election now. Whether there will be several legislative members who will be disqualified for re-election, that is another matter. That need to be reconsidered in light of the situations in Hong Kong. And I don't think these two considerations are opposite to each other. I think the top priority is to make sure that the pandemic is brought to a halt and lives in Hong Kong can be saved.
And Lawrence, let me also get your take on what's going to happen with these 4 opposition lawmakers, because the South China Morning Post reported that it would now be up to the city's government to decide whether the 4 can continue their roles without any conditions or will have to meet certain obligations. What are your thoughts on this? What kind of obligations or conditions does this refer to?
Well, one of the requirements is for a legislative councillor under the Basic Law, Article 79, is to uphold the Constitution, uphold the Basic Law, as well as swearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR government. So as a result, if there is any breach of oath, then there could be a motion to censor them under Article 79 of the Basic Law. So if any of the 4 legislative councillors were now found to have breached their oath of allegiance to the Basic Law and to the Hong Kong SAR region, then there is a possibility that they would be censored in the Legislative Council and thereby disqualified.
Now, some opposition has criticized the central government's move, and the U.S. also responded to this. According to a U.S. government notice posted on Tuesday, goods now made in Hong Kong for export for the United States will need to be labeled made in China after September 25th. And we have that statement. It says, unless exempted or accepted from marking, goods produced in Hong Kong, which are entered or withdrawn from warehouse for consumption into the United States after September 25th, 2020, must be marked to indicate that their origin is China. Professor Gao, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Department of Homeland Security, issued this notice and saying that the step is due to, quote-unquote, determination that Hong Kong is no longer sufficiently autonomous to justify differential treatment in relation to China. What effect will this latest move have on Hong Kong's trade with the United States?
Well, first of all, I think the U.S. government is barking at the wrong tree. Why? Because, first of all, the net export from Hong Kong to the United States is immaterial. And even though the U.S. government's decision will reclassify some of these Hong Kong-based exports to the United States as made in China, it will not have a major dent on the economic development of Hong Kong to start with. Secondly, I think the United States government needs to realize that they were actually very much part of the cause for the turbulence and violence in Hong Kong, which lasted for about 12 months. And now they are taking actions to limit the Hong Kong autonomy, actually. This is exactly the opposite of what the U.S. government openly preached about. And I think if you look at the violence or the turbulence which are happening in many parts of the United States, President Donald Trump has been calling them terrorist activities or anarchy, etc., threatening to sending the troops to deal with these outbursts. And compared that with the situation in Hong Kong, I think the United States could have really looked at the situation in Hong Kong in a more balanced way and refrain from taking any action which eventually will hurt the legitimate interest of the people of Hong Kong. However, I think purely from the Chinese perspective, this kind of cost that Hong Kong needs to take is immaterial, because what now is the most important thing is to defend China's sovereignty over Hong Kong, making sure that the one country, two system principle and the basic law will need to flourish at whatever cost. Therefore, I think the U.S. decision makers really need to realize they are really barking at the wrong tree.
These kind of tit-for-tat moves, Professor Gao, again, the decision comes after China announced sanctions on 11 Americans in retaliation for similar measures imposed by the United States. I mean, with what's going on here, what is Hong Kong's role in the escalating China-U.S. tensions, and how will Hong Kong cope with this kind of change?
Well, first of all, the situation in the bilateral relations between China and the United States is the worst ever since 1979, when the diplomatic relations were normalized, or ever since President Nixon's official visit to China in 1972. However, in the coming months, I'm afraid the situation will become even worse. Nevertheless, I think one thing we need to emphasize is that Washington should give up the fantasy that if they put on more pressure on China or Hong Kong SAR government, China will succumb to such pressure. No, China behaves in such a way that the more pressure you put onto it, it becomes more resilient. And the tit-for-tat retaliation against this unilaterally imposed sanctions by the US government speaks very loudly to the fact that China will never kowtow to such pressure imposed by the United States. And there is only one right thing to do, that is to tit-for-tat retaliation against those US-based politicians who put such pressure on China. And I'm afraid this kind of situation will last for quite some time in the next few months or even couple of years before overall China-US relations can be expected to stabilize.
Lawrence, what do you make of what's been said here? What does the Hong Kong community expect the central government to do on this with this new development of Hong Kong's trading status?
Well, as Professor Gao has explained, which I agree, that Hong Kong has departed from being a manufacturing city since the early 80s. In the early 80s, Hong Kong manufacturing and factories moved north to China, mainland China, to build their factories. And factories in Hong Kong have diminished. And Hong Kong has gradually developed into a tourism city, a financial hub, a professional service city, which we provide professional services. A lot of our GDP depends on professional service and tourism. And the financial industry as a listing hub for many companies from mainland China and internationally. So that we are no longer a manufacturing city. So if you, the Americans, were to label us in our goods that we manufacture as made in China instead of made in Hong Kong, it would not do us harm at all, I would say, because the manufacturing sector that contributes to Hong Kong's GDP is very, very minimal.
All right, thank you very much. Let's leave it there. Many thanks to Mr. Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Soochow University, and from Hong Kong, Lawrence Ma, Barrister and Chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation. We appreciate your perspectives and analysis. We'll now take a short break, and when we return, as Chinese and American citizens tell pollsters they don't view each other favorably, will relations ever be the same again? Stay with us.